some of the top innovations. We went back and looked at lots of innovations.
Right. Yeah.
Were there some that you found that were actually eureka moments? Like,
Yeah, there are. It's hard. I mean, at the end of the book, I have this kind of classificatory scheme where I try and really figure out what ideas were truly collaborative, what ideas were truly non-market, what ideas were truly market-driven, and it's not an exact science. I think it's so useful to kind of map those things out to just get a sense of where things are distributed, but it's a little tricky. There are, kind of genuine eureka moments, and I have certainly had in my own little, life, I've had points where I feel like the idea did kind of pop into my head. But there is almost always this kind of backstory, where when you actually go back and you realize the only reason you were capable of having that eureka moment is because you've been mulling with these other things, And there's a story I tell in the book about Darwin, where Darwin had written in his own autobiography that he had this eureka moment about natural selection in the fall of 1838, sitting there in his library one night reading Malthus on population, and he literally in his biography said, suddenly the idea popped into my head, and I thought, aha, at last I have a theory with which I can work, and for 100 years that was the canonical story of where, natural selection, that people call it the Malthusian epiphany, because of the way Darwin described it. And then this great scholar, Howard Gruber, went back and read through all of Darwin's notebooks and kept all these amazing copious notebooks. So you can see the whole kind of evolution, as it were, of his thought during that period. And what Gruber found actually is that there are all these passages months and months before the alleged epiphany where he's writing out what you would think was a textbook description of natural selection. And then there actually isn't an entry the night he reads Malthus where he's pretty excited, and there are actually like a lot of exclamation points, where he's like, haha, it's very exciting. But then the next day, he goes on and writes something totally different about like the sexual curiosity of primates. It's like he's had the biggest scientific idea of the 19th century, and the next day he's like, all right, so to the crossword puzzle. The earth, the waves have parted or whatever, And it isn't for another 2 months that he actually starts writing about his theory as this thing that he has, and then he has to deal with what he's going to do with it, which he spends 20 years trying to figure out, right? So what you see in that is like, even Darwin wanted to turn it into this epiphany, but the truth is he kind of had the idea, but he didn't fully realize what he had. And the epiphany was kind of not the idea coming to his head, but some self-consciousness of the idea or its value or its centrality. And even then, it took a while for him to really kind of sink in. So I think they are pretty rare.
Yeah.
So obviously, Google has their 20% hair loss. Like in your research and your tour, do you see other companies doing things to encourage that?
Well, it's really funny. Yes, I and I think that concept is around. I don't have to explain it as much. I find. So on Monday, I gave a speech in exotic St. Louis, and it was at the Nestle Purina headquarters there. Really, the Purina headquarters. The Nestle headquarters are in Switzerland, and very fancy and lovely. Purina are in St. Louis, and it's pet food basically. So I was kind of like, why didn't I get the Nestle gig? And so, but it's kind of a funny thing. But every company has to do with it. They wanted to create more of a public commitment to innovation in pet food. And what?
They wanted to eat their own dog.
They wanted to eat their own dog. Exactly. And so what they realized was that I think they really did a pretty good job. They had me there because they were opening this innovation center. And what they realized as an organization is that the physical structure of their building was inhibiting creativity, basically. And the biggest problem was basically conference rooms. Like when people were getting together to have some kind of brainstorming session or try and think creatively, they were going into a boring, bland conference room, sitting around a table, somebody driving a conversation with a PowerPoint deck, and it was just like an idea killing environment, not an idea cultivating environment. And so they built this innovation center, and one of the big things about it is that it's got coffee. It's got nice espresso with coffee, right? Because it's Nestle. So the coffee house is indeed part of it, but they created these kind of different spaces where you're kind of supposed to do different things. They're not sure if it's going to work. There's been a lot of resistance actually because they're like, they said, we're not going to schedule this. So, you just go. And if somebody else is using it, there's still always going to be room and you can find find another space, but you might actually have an interesting conversation with somebody who's already there. And like the organization is like, no schedule. It's like, what? That's impossible. You know, how's it gonna work? And so it's almost like a kind of a 20% time in the physical architecture of the building, where they're trying to create something. It's like when you're trying to really have good ideas, get your team thinking about a new product or new, packaging for product. Like, go here and hang out and let this kind of space push you in kind of new directions. And the other interesting thing they're doing is they're kind of cultivating these installations in the space, which I really like, actually, about kind of different cultures and marketplaces. So they've just gone on kind of like a fact-finding trip to Japan, and they brought back all this kind of, basically kind of youth culture stuff from Japan. And so the whole space is filled with all this Japanese kind of products and signage and design and things like that. And they're going to change it every 2 months. And so it's like this, almost like this art installation, but you're kind of like, hey, here's another culture's approach to different things, here's how they package things, here's another market things, whatever. Like, let's check it out and let's have our ideas in this kind of context. And then 2 months later, we'll do something totally different. So it was smart. I mean, I was impressed. So that kind of stuff, I think, is pretty cool. Yeah.
But smaller businesses or groups, it doesn't have to be a business, it could be like an NGO, where the constraints are tight, but are very much part of the goal of the business or organization. So I have a friend who runs an organization called Engineers Without Borders, and
Engineers Without Borders?
Engineers Without Borders. And to keep funding, you have to have a certain low percentage rate of burn, right? So like if you raise $100,000, you have to prove that you're only spending some percentage of that on it, like administrative or overhead costs, etc. And one of their challenges is that they're trying to make the world better and improve quality of water in Africa. I mean, these are like overwhelmingly broad, important, compelling goals, like more than different stories in a map. Yet to innovate in that space becomes very difficult for them because every day they're struggling to keep the lights on. And I think in small businesses, people running restaurants or cafes or being an accountant, these are places where innovation happens. It must happen, right? I mean, they get better and we keep going to better restaurants. And not all of them are like large concerns. But they do so without the luxury of like, I used to work at Microsoft, like we had all these like wonderfully interesting kabuki theater masks everywhere, but the ideas came from like staring in front of a beer fridge. Like, so my long question is really, how does this happen in very constrained environments without the luxury of the diversions that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In some ways, I'm working on this a little bit, and I'm doing the next book I'm doing is ostensibly a collected essays of kind of futurist stuff, but it's turning into an argument, and it's building on some of the politics that are implicit in this book. Just like there was a latent theory of innovation in Ghost Map, there's kind of a latent political theory in this book. And actually, I'm going to get one of the things that happened. I wrote about this in the Times, so some of you may have seen it. But when I was on book tour, there's this great event in Seattle called Words and Wine, where everybody pays like $60 and they come and get an author who gets interviewed. But what's great about it is that everybody's drinking the whole time, and you get like a signed book and you get cocktails and hors d'oeuvres, stuff like that. And the author gets to drink, which is what makes it really great. Most events at like a Borders in a mall somewhere, they don't give you nice wine. And so anyway, they have a very funny guy. I've done this twice now. They have a very funny guy who does interviews. And so for this book, we sat down and he's like, okay, Stephen, I read your book. My first question to you is, are you a communist? And it's like, it's all about open innovation and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, what? That was not the question I was expecting. And the thing I've subsequently realized, and I'm now working on this in terms of this opening essay that's going to be in this new book, is that the kinds of systems that I'm arguing for in this book don't easily fit the political kind of categories, right? When you think about it, if you think about the internet as a model for like other things, and the way that the internet has worked as being a model we can apply in other environments, or open source, or Wikipedia, all these things, they are not certainly straightforward free market capitalists. Nobody actually owns it. It's all contributed by people not necessarily working for money. On the other hand, it's the exact opposite of big government socialism, or kind of classic liberalism, where you have people who really want the state more involved. It's decentralized, but it's not market. And so it's hard to kind of figure out where that kind of fits in the spectrum. And I think actually a lot of people have interest in that space, but that space doesn't really have quite a name yet, I think. I then to the question of, I'm very interested in this idea of figuring out mechanisms to support and reward people who are working on social problems where there's basically market failure, right? When the market does a really good job of making cooler and cooler cell phones. It does a really good job of making cooler, whatever. What?
Viagra.
Yeah, right. Yeah, really. But it doesn't right now. It doesn't do a really good job of getting clean water in Africa or whatever it is. So to create then mechanisms whereby maybe what the state's role should be. This is why NGOs are so interesting. Maybe what the state's role should be is not to say on an executive level, we are going to solve this problem top down, we have sent our bureaucrats there to fix it, or we're going to throw this money at this problem because we know the problems with that company. Maybe what you do is you create artificial market incentives. And you say, and there are a lot of interesting work being done with kind of competitions in this way, where you create artificial market incentives and say, the market isn't solving this problem, and there's no actual reward out there if you do solve it directly. But we'll create this artificial reward, and we'll spend $100 million to whoever gets to this result will get this cash, or if you get closer and closer to it. And that's a bit of venture philanthropy is kind of like in this mode. But then you can create environments where maybe there are more resources, and you diversify the pool of people who are trying to solve the problem, right? And I think that's one of the things that people underestimate about markets, is markets are great because people are incentivized for economic reward, but they're also great because there are lots of different independent entities trying to solve the same problems. And so, if you've got 10 people trying to solve a problem, that's great because, only one of them has to figure out how to do it, and then the problem is solved. If you've only got one person trying to solve it, then if they don't get there, they don't get there. And so, creating those kind of mechanisms that help and support and maybe raise the ceiling a little bit on the economic pressure that an organization like that would have, I think is a really interesting thing. That was a way too long answer, but I'm just totally in that world right now. So, yeah.
One of the things that I've taken from this, and I wonder, from working with you for a couple of years now, is like more of a lean back, like have a glass of wine,
Yeah.
and like
Or coffee.
or coffee or both,
Yeah.
and sort of stop thinking about something so hard,
Right.
Stop trying to figure it out, and just lean back a little bit, and like are there other sort of practical things that you do or that you see that like organizations can do or teams can do or takeaways?
Yeah.
Like that's a very practical thing that I've taken from you. To drink more
wine.
Drink
Yeah.
more wine.
That's one of your phrase.
It's a hard one.
That's the takeaway I would say. Well, the one thing that I've done that I'm sure some of you have done some version or another, but like I keep this. I've been for the last 6 years. I've been keeping this one document where I put all of my hunches and fragments of ideas. That's just it was a Word document. Now it's Google Docs. I get to it from anywhere, whatever. And I put ideas for books, ideas for magazine articles, ideas for startups. Outside in the gen of the idea, outside in the germ of the idea, outside in is in there. Little fragments of speech ideas. From the very big to the very small. And I keep one document. I don't have separate folders for like ideas related to this or ideas related to that. When a project finally really takes off, then I will break it off and say, okay, now I've sold this book that goes on. I'm working on this book, and it kind of deserves its own thing. But everything that's still kind of in incubation mode goes in this one document. And now lots of people do this, I'm sure. But the big thing is that it's one document. I've been keeping the same document all the time, and I try and reread it every like 2 or 3 months. And it's really long now, so it takes some time. But it's just amazing how much stuff you forget that you come up with because it doesn't get anchored to something. It doesn't have a place to land yet. You're like, wouldn't it be interesting if jetpacks? I think I've got an idea about jetpacks. But you can't. We don't do jetpacks at Outside In, so you don't bring it up at the weekly meeting, and so 2 weeks later you forgot. Actually. Oh, so I mentioned on the nerds list. And I'm jetting in. I'm going to be a little late.
Josh does say he's on a spaceship. Josh's signature
I
does say
met
he's
this
on a
guy
spaceship.
the other day who started Marquis Jets and sold to NetJets, and also in some fashion manages the Jonas Brothers. And I was like, he's a totally hilarious character, and I was like, wow, private jets and the Jonas Brothers